On the afternoon of June the 2nd, 2026, inside Microsoft's Build conference in San Francisco, a technical fellow named Chetan Nayak walked on stage and said 4 words that most of the audience did not yet understand the weight of. He said, "We're 1,000 times better." He was talking about a chip called Majorana 2, and within hours, physicists, journalists, and investors around the world were scrambling to figure out what had actually just happened. Some of them are still arguing about it right now, today, as you watch this, because what was unveiled that afternoon might be the moment 2 of the most powerful technologies on Earth, quantum computing and artificial intelligence, stopped developing separately and started building each other. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand something that most people, including most people working in tech, still do not fully grasp. Let's rewind for a second and understand why this moment matters so much. For more than 3 decades, quantum computing has been trapped by a single brutal obstacle. Qubits, the quantum equivalent of the bits inside your laptop, are almost unbelievably fragile. They exist in a delicate state called superposition, and the moment they interact with the outside world, a stray vibration, a tiny fluctuation in temperature, even a whisper of electromagnetic noise, that state collapses and the calculation is ruined. Scientists call this decoherence, and it is the wall that every quantum engineering team on the planet has been smashing their heads against since the 1990s. Classical computers, the ones inside your phone right now, do not have this problem because bits are either a 1 or a 0, stable and boring. Qubits are neither boring nor stable, and that instability is exactly why quantum computers can, in theory, explore an almost unimaginable number of possibilities at once. The problem has never been the theory. The problem has always been keeping the qubits alive long enough to actually use them. It is worth remembering that Microsoft is a relative latecomer to actually shipping hardware in this race. IBM has spent years steadily climbing its own qubit count roadmap with superconducting processors. Google built its reputation with the Sycamore chip back in 2019. And companies like D-Wave have pursued an entirely different, more specialized approach called quantum annealing. Microsoft, by contrast, spent nearly 2 decades betting almost its entire quantum program on a single, much riskier idea that topological qubits, if they could actually be built, would be so inherently resistant to decoherence that the whole reliability problem might simply disappear rather than needing to be engineered around piece by piece. For years, many in the field considered that bet close to reckless, because nobody had ever definitively proven a working topological qubit existed outside of theory. That is the wall Microsoft says it just put a crack in. Majorana 2 is the 2nd generation of a chip built around a different approach to qubits entirely, one based on a theoretical particle called a Majorana zero mode, first proposed by the physicist Ettore Majorana back in 1937. The idea is that instead of storing quantum information in one fragile location, you spread it out non-locally across the 2 ends of a tiny superconducting wire, so that a local disturbance cannot easily destroy it. Microsoft's first version of this chip, Majorana 1, was announced in February of 2025, and immediately drew both excitement and heavy scientific scrutiny. Majorana 2 is the answer to over a year of that scrutiny, and according to Microsoft, the results are staggering. By swapping the aluminum superconductor used in the earlier design for lead, the team achieved what they call parity lifetimes, essentially how long a qubit holds its quantum information, of more than 20 seconds on average, with some devices lasting as long as a full minute. Compare that to the 1 to 12 milliseconds typical of the previous generation, and you get an improvement of roughly 1,000 times, not 10% better, not double, 1,000 times more reliable. Here's the detail that should genuinely stop you. Microsoft says it did not get there through human research alone. The materials science work behind Majorana 2 was accelerated using Microsoft's own agentic AI research platform called Microsoft Discovery, a system that deploys autonomous AI agents to explore possible material configurations, run simulations, and propose new physical structures far faster than a human research team could manage on their own. In other words, artificial intelligence helped design a piece of hardware that exists specifically to make artificial intelligence, and computing in general, exponentially more powerful. Microsoft has now made Microsoft Discovery generally available, not just to its internal quantum team, but to outside customers, research institutions, and companies who want AI agents helping accelerate their own scientific work. Off the back of these results, Microsoft has revised its entire roadmap. The company previously expected a fully scalable quantum computer by 2033. It now says 2029, 3 years from now, cutting its own timeline in half. Now, before you get swept away, I want to be completely honest with you, because this is exactly the kind of story that turns into hype if nobody pumps the brakes. Within hours of Microsoft's announcement, physicists started pushing back hard. This is not the first time Microsoft has announced a topological qubit breakthrough only to face serious pushback from the physics community. Several researchers who reviewed the new technical paper pointed out that the measurements, while real and reproducible, do not conclusively prove that what Microsoft has built is actually behaving like a true topological Majorana qubit, as opposed to something called a trivial Andreev-bound state, a different physical phenomenon that can mimic some of the same signatures under certain conditions. Scientific American ran a piece the same day quoting outside experts who said, bluntly, that the underlying claim about the particle itself remains unresolved. So here is the fair way to think about this. The materials engineering achievement, the thousandfold jump in qubit lifetime, appears to be real and measurable. Whether that qubit is truly the exotic topological particle Microsoft has spent a decade betting its entire quantum strategy on is still one of the most contested questions in condensed matter physics. Both things can be true at once, and understanding that nuance is what separates someone who actually understands this story from someone who just read a headline. Microsoft is not the only company making the physics community sit up straight this year. Back in October of 2025, Google's quantum AI division published a result in the journal Nature that is, frankly, even more concrete than Microsoft's announcement, because unlike a press release, a Nature publication has already been through rigorous adversarial peer review before the public ever sees it. Google's chip, called Willow, was used to run a new algorithm nicknamed quantum echoes, built around something physicists call an out-of-time order correlator, or OTOC, a way of measuring how a tiny disturbance in a quantum system spreads outward over time, almost like a butterfly effect you can actually calculate. Using 65 of Willow's 105 superconducting qubits, Google's team ran this algorithm and found that it completed the calculation roughly 13,000 times faster than the best classical algorithm running on Frontier, one of the most powerful supercomputers that exists on this planet. Hartmut Nevin, the Google quantum AI executive who announced the result, put it simply: think hours on Willow versus years on the classical machine. What makes this result different from previous quantum computing claims is verifiability. Google had made quantum advantage claims before, back in 2019 with a chip called Sycamore, but that earlier claim was built on a task called random circuit sampling, which critics correctly pointed out had no real-world use and could not be independently checked, because the output was essentially random noise nobody could verify against anything else. Quantum echoes is different. Its results can be checked two separate ways, either by running the same calculation on a second, independent quantum computer and confirming the answers match, or by comparing the prediction directly against a real physical experiment in nature itself, since the algorithm is designed to model real molecular and material behavior. Google's team has already pointed to applications in extending nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, essentially helping researchers determine the physical structure of molecules with far greater precision, along with future potential in catalyst research and battery material design. This is what scientists mean when they say, we may finally be approaching genuine useful quantum advantage rather than a laboratory party trick. There is a third piece of the story that almost nobody outside the quantum community has been paying attention to, and it might end up being the most important threat of all. Earlier this year, a researcher who had been working inside Google's quantum AI division left to help co-found a startup working alongside Caltech, focused on what some in the field are now calling AI-driven quantum discovery. Before leaving, he reportedly told a colleague still at Google that he had been using AI tools inside his quantum research and was seeing what he described as crazy results. Not long after that, Google posted a job listing specifically seeking a quantum researcher to help build AI-based discovery pipelines. Then, within the same general window this year, both Google and this new startup published parallel research, touching on very similar territory in atomic-scale quantum computing, on the same general timeline, almost as if two teams had independently arrived at the same door from different directions. Whether or not that is coincidence, it points to something bigger than any single chip announcement. Artificial intelligence is no longer simply a tool that quantum researchers occasionally reach for. It is starting to actively generate quantum research, exploring configurations of materials and architectures that no human researcher would have intuitively tried first. Financial markets are another place this could show up sooner than people expect. Modern risk models already struggle to account for millions of interacting variables simultaneously: correlated defaults, liquidity shocks, cascading counterparty exposure, the exact kind of tangled high-dimensional system that contributed to the 2008 financial crisis, catching so many institutions by surprise. Quantum accelerated optimization, paired with AI systems capable of deciding which parts of a risk calculation actually need quantum hardware, could eventually let financial institutions model that kind of systemic risk far more completely. Rather than relying on the simplified approximations classical systems are forced to use today. None of this is available yet in any production financial system, but it is precisely the category of problem, high-dimensional, combinatorial, and quantum in its underlying mathematics that researchers keep pointing to as a near-term target once hardware like Willow or Majorana 2 scales further. This is the loop that should make anyone paying attention sit up. Quantum computing, once it matures, makes AI faster and dramatically more powerful, because certain categories of calculation that would take classical hardware longer than the age of the universe become tractable. AI, in turn, is now accelerating quantum research itself, helping design better materials, better chip architectures, better qubit designs. Better qubits produce more capable quantum hardware, which then enables even more powerful AI, which then drives the next round of quantum breakthroughs. This is not a straight line of progress. It is a feedback loop, and multiple independent teams at Microsoft, Google, and elsewhere are now showing early evidence that this loop has already started turning. While all of this was unfolding, the financial markets delivered their own verdict. On June 4th, 2026, Quantinuum, the quantum computing company majority owned by Honeywell and formed through a 2021 merger with the UK. From Cambridge Quantum began trading on the Nasdaq global market under the ticker QNT. The company priced its upsized initial public offering at $60 a share, selling 28 million shares and raising roughly $1.68 billion, with shares climbing further once trading actually opened. On the same day, Quantinuum also announced a memorandum of understanding with Mitsubishi Electric, a Japanese industrial giant with more than a century of history and around 150,000 employees worldwide, to jointly explore quantum and hybrid quantum classical approaches for industrial engineering problems, including computational fluid dynamics and advanced simulation and design work. To be fair to the whole picture, Quantinuum's own public filings show a company still very much in build mode. Its first quarter 2026 revenue actually fell sharply year over year, down to around $5 million from roughly $19 million. Customer bookings contracted over the same period, and its net loss widened to well over $100 million for the quarter. That is not a criticism. It is simply the honest financial reality of a frontier hardware company betting everything on a technology still being proven out. But when institutional investors are willing to put over $1.5 billion behind a company built entirely on quantum computing, even one still losing money, it signals that serious, conservative capital is now positioning for quantum's arrival, not just watching from the sidelines. The direction almost every major player, Microsoft, Google, Quantinuum, and IBM among them, is building toward is not a future where quantum computers replace classical computers. That is not how this transition works, and probably never will be. For the foreseeable future, quantum computers will excel at very specific categories of problems, ones involving quantum mechanical behavior at the molecular or atomic scale, while classical computers continue to handle essentially everything else. The real value emerging right now is in the intelligent routing layer, an AI system smart enough to recognize which piece of a research question actually requires quantum hardware, send that piece off to a quantum processor through the cloud, bring the answer back, and blend it seamlessly with ordinary classical computation. Imagine a medical researcher with no background in quantum physics or machine learning, simply posing a question to an AI interface, which quietly handles all of that routing behind the scenes and hands back a complete, accurate answer. The quantum complexity becomes invisible. She just gets better answers, faster. So what does this actually mean for you in concrete, non-abstract terms? Start with medicine. Developing a single new approved drug currently takes an average of somewhere between 12 and 15 years and costs between $1 and $3 billion, and the majority of that time is consumed by molecular simulation, essentially predicting how a candidate drug molecule will behave inside the human body. Classical computers are fundamentally bad at this task, not because engineers haven't tried hard enough, but because molecular behavior at the atomic level is genuinely quantum mechanical in nature, and trying to model a quantum system using classical hardware is a bit like trying to capture flowing water with a still photograph. You get an approximation, and in medicine, approximations can be the difference between a drug that looks promising in simulation and one that fails catastrophically in human trials. Quantum computers, by contrast, do not approximate quantum systems. They calculate them directly because they are themselves quantum systems, built from the same underlying quantum mechanics they are trying to model. That is the core reason researchers keep pointing to fields like catalyst design and protein folding as some of the first places a scaled quantum advantage would actually be felt outside a physics lab, since both depend on precisely modeling how electrons behave across large, complex molecules, a task classical supercomputers can only ever approximate no matter how much computing power gets thrown at it. As hardware like Willow and Majorana 2 matures toward genuine practical use, drug discovery timelines are positioned to compress dramatically. In diseases that have remained stubbornly untreatable, certain cancers, Alzheimer's, antibiotic-resistant infections, may shift from being scientific mysteries to solvable engineering problems, simply because we finally have hardware capable of matching the complexity of the biology involved. Climate science stands to benefit in a similar way. Current climate models are extraordinarily sophisticated, but they still rely on classical approximations of systems governed by quantum chemistry, particularly the interactions between gases, particles, and radiation at the molecular level that determine outcomes at the planetary scale. More accurate quantum simulations of atmospheric and material chemistry translate directly into sharper climate models, which in turn means more precise, evidence-based decisions about where carbon capture technology actually makes a measurable difference, and how specific ecosystems are likely to respond to specific changes in temperature or chemical composition. Then there is cryptography, and this is the part that tends to make people quietly uneasy once they understand it. The overwhelming majority of encrypted information moving across the internet right now, your banking transactions, private messages, medical records, and plenty of government communications, is secured using a mathematical assumption that factoring extremely large numbers takes an impractical amount of time on a classical computer. That assumption underlies RSA encryption, and it is held up for decades precisely because factoring a large enough number classically would take far longer than the universe has existed. A sufficiently powerful, fault-tolerant quantum computer could, in theory, factor that same number in a matter of hours. The cryptographic community has known this was coming for a long time, which is why the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology finalized its first set of post-quantum cryptographic standards back in 2024, algorithms specifically designed to remain secure even against a quantum-capable attacker. The real question is not whether quantum computers will eventually be capable of breaking current encryption. Most experts agree that day is coming once the hardware scales far enough. The real question is whether the world's digital infrastructure finishes migrating to quantum-safe encryption before that day arrives. And right now, that migration is underway, but nowhere close to complete. There is a specific concept security researchers call harvest now, decrypt later, describing a strategy where encrypted data is collected and stored today, with the expectation that it can simply be decrypted once quantum hardware catches up to the underlying mathematics. Multiple governments have publicly acknowledged this as a genuine active concern. Not a fringe theory, which is exactly why intelligence agencies and major technology companies alike have been quietly accelerating their own transitions to post-quantum algorithms over the last 2 years, well ahead of any quantum computer actually being capable of the attack itself, simply because migrating an entire global communications infrastructure to new encryption standards takes years on its own, regardless of how fast the hardware race moves. I do want to slow down here and be straight with you about something, because there's a lot of noise in this space right now, and you deserve clarity rather than hype. Some claims currently circulating online describe supposed quantum neural networks achieving human-level generalization, dressed up in scientific-sounding language, shared widely on social media, and presented without any named organization behind them, without confirmed performance metrics, and without disclosed hardware details. When an extraordinary claim shows up with no verifiable evidence behind it, the correct reaction is patience, not excitement. Real breakthroughs, the kind documented here, Majorana 2, Willow's Quantum Echoes result, Quantinuum's public offering, go through actual scrutiny. They are published in journals like Nature, picked apart by independent physicists within hours, filed with financial regulators, and opened up to public inspection. You do not need to exaggerate any of what is genuinely happening this year. The verified version of this story is already remarkable enough on its own. There is also a version of this story that does not end well, and pretending otherwise would not be honest either. There is a version where quantum-accelerated AI capability advances faster than the institutions meant to govern it, faster than international agreements on quantum security, faster than the migration to post-quantum encryption. There's a version where harvest now, decrypt later pays off for adversarial actors, and years of stored data quietly becomes readable overnight. These are not fringe fears. They are risks openly acknowledged by the scientists and engineers building this technology, which is exactly why the same institutions racing toward these breakthroughs are simultaneously building the safeguards alongside them: post-quantum encryption standards, AI alignment research, and early international cooperation frameworks around quantum security. The competition happening right now between Microsoft, Google, Quantinuum, IBM, and others is not slowing this down. If anything, each announcement seems to be pushing the others to move faster. The real race underway is not simply nations or corporations chasing quantum supremacy. It is a race between capability and governance, between how fast this can be built and how wisely it gets built, and that outcome has not been decided yet. It will be shaped by the choices scientists, regulators, engineers, and yes, ordinary people who take the time to actually understand what is happening, make over the next several years. Here is what is worth carrying away from all of this. None of what has been described here is speculative science fiction sitting decades in the future. Majorana 2 exists, was unveiled at Microsoft's Build conference on June 2nd, 2026, and is currently being scrutinized in real time by physicists who remain divided on exactly what it proves. Willow's 13,000 times speed up on the quantum echoes algorithm is sitting in the pages of Nature, already independently reviewed. Quantinuum is a publicly traded company on the Nasdaq right now, backed by more than $1.5 billion of fresh capital and a new industrial partnership with one of Japan's largest manufacturers. Microsoft's own AI-driven research platform is generally available to customers today, not locked away in an internal lab. The feedback loop between artificial intelligence and quantum physics, AI helping design better quantum hardware. That hardware in turn making future AI dramatically more capable has visibly begun, and researchers closest to this work are describing what they are seeing using words like unprecedented, historic, and once in a while, off the record. More simply, crazy. Picture what a mature version of this world actually looks like once the remaining engineering hurdles are cleared. It looks like cancer treatments tailored to the exact molecular signature of an individual tumor, validated in weeks instead of decades. It looks like climate interventions modeled with enough precision that policy stops relying on expensive guesswork and starts targeting specific, measurable actions. It looks like new materials nobody has synthesized yet. More efficient solar cells, batteries that charge in a fraction of the time and last far longer, discovered not by a lucky accident in a lab, but through AI systems systematically exploring a quantum mechanical solution space that classical computers simply cannot reach on their own. It looks like problems that have quietly persisted across entire generations finally becoming solvable. Not because anyone suddenly got smarter, but because the tools have finally caught up to the complexity of the problems themselves. That world is arriving faster than most people currently expect, and based purely on what has been confirmed this year alone, Majorana 2, the quantum echoes result on Willow, Quantinuum's public debut, and its new industrial partnership, it is closer than the headlines are giving it credit for. The real question left standing is not whether any of this will arrive. It is whether you actually understand it once it does, because the people who grasp why a 1,000-fold jump in qubit stability matters, who understand what a verifiable quantum advantage actually means versus an unverifiable one, and who know exactly why post-quantum encryption has become urgent rather than theoretical, are going to navigate the next decade very differently from everyone who dismissed all of this as too complicated, too futuristic, or too far away to matter to them personally. This transition is going to restructure entire industries, eliminate whole categories of work, create fields that do not currently exist, shift where economic value concentrates, and reshape geopolitical competition in ways that will look completely obvious in hindsight and are almost invisible while they are actually happening. You are watching it happen in real time, right now, in labs in Redmond, in Mountain View, in Broomfield, in Tokyo, and in a Caltech office where a researcher once quietly told a friend he was seeing lots of crazy results. Somewhere in one of those labs, right now, someone is staring at a number on a screen that simply does not fit inside the expectations of everything that came before it. A number that will not make the evening news tonight, and probably will not make it next week either, but that historians, years from now, may end up circling as the exact moment two of the most powerful technologies humanity has ever built stop developing on separate tracks. And they are about to write it down.